Hey summoners, make sure that you're subscribed to the Mobalytics YouTube channel and hit that bell button, that way you're always up to date and part of our notification squad.
Hello summoners and welcome back to Mobalytics, where today
What? Cletus, it's not April Fool's anymore, get off the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Anyway, sorry about that. Welcome back to Mobalytics, where today we have the patch 9.7 tier list video. Anyway, let's move into the tier list, starting off in the top lane, where we have my pick of the patch in Hecarim, Nasus, Kayle, and Urgot. And before we get to my pick of the patch, let's talk about Kayle and Urgot. Both Kayle and Urgot were absolute nightmares on the previous patch, did too much damage, were quite a bit too safe, and were too tanky and hard to kill. Urgot and Kayle also received nerfs on this patch. We still have them in S tier because they were just so strong in the previous patch that they're probably still going to be there despite the nerfs. You will feel Urgot's nerfs later on into the game with his scaling because of the percentage damage, and you probably will feel the Kayle nerfs early on. But again, she will scale up to her good late game, and her laning phase with Kleptomancy and Epoch usually isn't that bad anyway. It's like surprisingly good and does decently well enough in lane, which is why Kayle is still going to be S tier. For my pick of the patch, I chose Hecarim top lane, and this is because this is something we've seen a bit more recently. You've probably even seen TSM whip this out in playoffs, with Broken Blade playing some Hecarim top lane. The build is Conquer into Inspiration, taking Time Warp Tonic because you want to use that with your Corruption Potion start, and you actually do go a different build. You don't go Trinity Force, but I like to go Iceborne Gauntlet into Black Cleaver. The reason Hecarims were doing this is because this build gives you some great synergy with the phase movement speed in the Shred on Cleaver, as well as the slow on Iceborne Gauntlet. It gives you the mana that you need, it gives you the slow and the movement speed from phase, gives you Shred, and it gives you 40% CDR. Another champion that is probably just going to be a lot better on this patch is Dr. Mundo because of the buffs he is receiving. This is kind of a slippery slope that they've had with Mundo for a while, buffing and nerfing him and buffing and nerfing him, where they're constantly adjusting how much damage he does. If he does too much damage, he's hyper broken and is pretty much nerfed instantly and needs to be banned in competitive play. And if he's too weak and doesn't do enough damage, then he's kind of just this meatball that you can ignore. So having Mundo be a champion that will come back, especially if tanks are going to come back with overgrowth buffs, and if you see more tank junglers, it's possible that Mundo could be A tier. It's a little bit of a prediction considering he wasn't on the tier list last time, but don't be surprised if this champion actually starts to be good again. Finally, for top laners, you guys need to watch out for Wit's End on this patch. It was changed around and becomes a much better item for things like Jax, maybe even things like Kled, but definitely things like Aurelia as well. And again, maybe even some Vayne top lane. It's hard to say exactly how good it will be on ranged champions, but for sure for bruisers and AD bruisers, guys that like attack speed such as Jax and Aurelia and even Kayle will do very well with Wit's End. For your high-elo top laners, Kayle, Urgot, and Riven are basically the triad of the three best top laners in the game, and not too far behind them are things like Hecarim and Kennen doing well top lane. Rumble received some buffs on this patch, so definitely watch out for Rumble. And with the buffs to crit itemization, a couple of Gangplanks have been doing better recently. The build seems to be like Essence Reaver, Infinity Edge, Ghostblade at the moment, and you still obviously want your Trinity Force, but I've seen some almost entirely crit Gangplanks being successful, so it's hard to say exactly what the build is on GP. I think with a bit more time, this champion will come back and start to do well. People are just figuring out exactly what you want to do in terms of your crit items. Alright, moving on to the jungle position, where in S tier we have Udyr, Vi, Master Yi, and Nunu and Willump. We also have Hecarim as a pick of the patch as well from Adam, but talking about Hecarim jungle, which we'll talk about in a second. There are a couple of champions I really like on this list. Jarvan's really good, and that Hextech Jarvan skin is coming out on this patch, so obviously he'll get that nice little 10% damage buff. Whenever you put on a skin, of course you get a damage buff. That's always how it works. Mundo could come back in the jungle as well because of the buffs to Cinderhulk, and in general, the buffs to Cinderhulk champions means that Nunu and Willump, who was already doing well, definitely will get even stronger and have a faster clear speed. Also, some tank junglers like Amumu and Rammus, and even Jarvan doesn't always have to go warrior, he can go full tank with Cinderhulk. You'll see these champions do a bit better. Adam's pick of the patch was Hecarim jungle because of the last set of buffs and some new tech with Hecarim now taking Conqueror. His ability to duel and snowball the early game went way up. Tunneling more into this concept, many Hecarims now want to take Warrior Enchantment rather than Cinderhulk and further push his massive presence in the early and mid game. For summoner spells, Ghost is the most common, though over in China right now there are some taking Ignite to push his dueling power way over the edge rather than taking Ghost for better ganks. You'll have to try a bit of this yourself and figure out what you like. I would say potentially in low elo Ghost is still probably better, but if you're able to use Ignite pretty well, I can see why that's also quite good. With this level of snowball potential and a newfound ability to outduel other junglers at the scuttle fights, Hecarim will now go to A tier. As for the high-elo jungle list, Kha'Zix, Rek'Sai, and Nunu all doing well in S tier. All three of these champions can carry solo queue games. Even though Nunu is a tank, he can carry just as hard as Rek'Sai and Kha'Zix. Udyr, Vi, Jarvan, and Hecarim, again, all really good champions. Even in high-elo, don't underestimate Udyr and Vi. There are people that are spamming Udyr to get to really high ranks in NA Challenger, and there are a couple of Vi one-tricks that do really well at the moment. Don't underestimate how good Vi is. On top of that, Karthus and even Evelynn doing quite a bit better, and Taliyah, which we'll talk about in mid, but even Taliyah jungle is doing better now. It's a lot more popular in Asian and Eastern regions, and it's taking a while for Taliyah jungle to come back in NA, but it seems like you can just spam gank and once again play around that early game gank potential with your W into E combo, and you hurt really hard at scuttle fights. Moving on to the mid lane. In S tier, we have Morgana, Vel'Koz, Ahri, and Zed. For Morgana, we actually put out a video this week just a couple days ago talking about how good she is and can you climb with her in the mid lane, and it's a pretty good video going over Morg, so if you're looking for Morgana being a bit more in depth and figuring out how to play her, I definitely recommend checking out that video that we made. As far as assassins right now, they do quite well, and things like Zed and Ahri, especially Ahri with that Glacial Augment build, seems quite good. In A tier, we also have Taric as Hewitt's pick of the patch, which we will talk about right now. Funneling may have become less popular since its peak after patch 8.12 last year, but it's never gone away completely. The popular strategy is Taric funneling a champion like Master Yi, and this works of course the best with a duo queue, but it is still theoretically possible to pull it off and win games solo, as long as you have someone on your team that understands you will let them tax your lane for free. You can still pick supportive Taric mid lane and do well, and if you even look at the win rates, it's completely possible to win this solo and without a duo. It just happens to be that most commonly it will work with a Master Yi. Of course, it still does work best in a duo, and we do recommend you do it if you want to duo queue with a friend, but just saying theoretically it's possible that you could make it work solo. We also have mid-beast pick of the patch being Taliyah this time for mid lane. He favors a build path going GLP into Morellonomicon and Deathcap. It's true that Taliyah has been under the radar for quite a while now, and she does have one of the highest win rates and strongest early games due to the strength of her Q and a 1v1 and 2v2 skirmishes when you're roaming and looking to force Scuttlecrab fights. Looking at the meta right now for mid lane, there will be a huge shift this patch as Sylas and Lissandra have been nerfed into the ground, and the Dark Seal having 33% of its AP lost and the resale value being hit hard, it might completely kill the corrupting and 2 Dark Seal strategy. It will definitely become less cost efficient, and it will punish laners who depend on those strategies such as Kassadin to survive poke matchups and sustain, allowing more dominant laners such as Taliyah or even LeBlanc having a better chance of establishing lane leads and forcing back timings for those champions. Really bad lane champions who are surviving on that type of sustain, such as Kassadin once again, will most likely always have to take teleport instead of ignite, simply because you'll have a much worse back timing and higher elo if you get punished. For the high-elo mid laners, Taliyah, Zed, and Katarina have become the top tier of high-elo mids. Even though Taliyah is underrated right now, it is a super strong mid laner, and Zed and Katarina have become the best assassins for carrying in 1v9ing solo queue. Katarina's using a weird Conqueror plus Death's Dance setup at the moment. It seems weird at first, but trust me, it's really good. Morgana in high-elo usually wants to favor that Glacial Augment and GLP path, similar to Ahri as well. Both of those champions are quite good, and basically Talon has taken Taliyah's place right now. They've swapped places. Last time Taliyah was A tier, now she's S tier because people have really figured out about how to play her and how good she is. In S tier for the bottom lane carry position, Jinx, Ashe, Vayne, and Draven find themselves there, all for slightly different reasons as well and fulfill different niches. Jinx is the best hyper carry and late game scaling ADC at the moment, outputting tons of damage with both lethal tempo and fleet footwork, either of them being quite good. Jinx scales super well, has AoE with hurricanes and her rocket, and does so well in the current meta because you do get time to at least get your 2 to 3 items most of the time. You're not really going to be punished hard enough in the laning phase. Ashe is the best supportive ADC in the game, having that nice buff to her E, allowing her to get assists on times in which she gets vision with her hawkshot, having a fantastic ultimate and nice slows, allowing her team to get setups and being able to take objectives a bit easier with that vision. Vayne is the best mid-game ADC in the game, having a big spike on her Bork and Rageblade combination, going press the attack and being actually decent in lane, or at least better than she's ever been. And Draven is the best laning ADC in the game and the hardest lane bully. Right now Dravens have swapped away from Conqueror a little bit and either going press the attack or Kleptomancy. Both of these are good options and allow you to be a nice mid-game and especially strong early game ADC, spiking really hard on your Bloodthirster first item. Even though it's not mentioned anywhere on our tier list, I will give a quick honorable mention and shout out to the Sona Taric bot lane strategy. We've seen this more and more recently. Honestly, it does seem quite good. However, I would say it's still a little bit unproven and untested right now to see if it's truly OP, and it seems like they're only good together. For example, it's probably not true that Sona as a carry herself, meaning just going with another support like Sona Blitzcrank or Sona Thresh or something like that. It seems like Sona Taric specifically is the one that's really good, so we'll have to see. Potentially could be on the tier list next time because we did include Taric and Taric Master Yi on this patch, but we'll have to see. I do think Sona Taric is good, and if you know how to play both those champions with you and your friend, you're probably fine, but it's just worth noting that they're probably not broken enough yet that we feel like they deserve to be on the tier list. For High-ELO bottom laners, Jinx, Vayne, and Draven are all great S tier options, and Ashe just drops down a little bit because you'll probably be punished really hard by good Draven and Vayne players in the early and mid game. On top of that, Ezreal moves a little bit up after they went ahead and changed the tier of the goddess thing where you can no longer go both and you can't go Archangel second after your first mana immune. Ezreals have just been swapping over to Luden's Echo, and it seems perfectly okay as well. It's not as good as the Archangels for sure because you really wanted that massive shield, but more or less Luden's does sub out what you need and you're more of an AP Ezreal build, and it seems perfectly fine in A tier. And last but certainly not least, let's move on to supports. In S tier, we have Sona, Soraka, Nami, and Morgana, all doing well, and your best enchanters in the game by far. Janna's not too far behind, and Lux support is definitely a little bit underrated, but pretty much these are going to be your best S tier picks. While it's true that Morgana was nerfed on this patch, it's also true that this really doesn't impact support all that much. The only thing is the health regen does matter in poke lanes, and if you're playing against a Zyra or a Brand or even a Soraka, sometimes these lanes will be even harder than they already are for you, but the W damage doesn't really matter because you don't build tons and tons of AP on support Morgana, and she's just so good and Black Shield is just so oppressive that more or less these nerfs don't really matter, and that's why you still see her in S tier. For the high-elo supports, in S tier we have Soraka, Nami, and Thresh. Obviously Thresh shoots way up in higher elo and they're able to abuse his kit and use the Aftershock rune to its full potential and make him seem incredibly broken and still probably receiving some nerfs in the near future. Soraka and Nami are your best enchanters for high-elo, and the most important thing about Soraka is make sure you guys are taking Barrier. Everything else on Soraka is probably not the best summoner spell, and if you take Barrier you literally become a different champion and able to have much more strengths than weaknesses, so definitely check out Soraka with Barrier. But if you want to know more about your strengths and weaknesses and check out something today, make sure you check out Mobalytics at mobalytics.gg using the link in the description down below. We'll help you climb higher and get to your elo faster this season in Season 9. Check out Mobalytics today at mobalytics.gg. It's your all-in-one platform for improving and getting better at League of Legends.